Hi, in this session we will be defining certain terms. In my opinion, the entire problem of security today, why certain security needs are not complied with, why there is a lacuna in implementing certain security policies, one of the root causes of this is people do not understand the definition of different terms that are involved in information security. So, this session we will basically concentrate on defining what we term as information security. A lot of people have attempted to define information security. The term information security actually means protecting information and information systems from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification or destruction. So, this is the definition that is popularly given for information security. But let us go and understand, let us split this word security information. First we will go and define what is security, because security is more closer and more practical for us to understand. First and foremost, when you look at the working of a system, there is something called the normal functioning of the system. Security is not reflected in the normal functioning of the system, in the sense that security is not a functional requirement. Security is something which monitors the function, which guides the function so that certain properties are not violated. So, in principle security, when we try to implement security policies, one of the basic assumption is that the system is correctly implemented according to the functional requirements of the specification, and that the system operates according to its intention. So, security is a completely non-functional requirement which basically tries and monitors how certain things are happening inside the system. In some sense, we have a product, say we have a core banking product which basically takes care of your database and your access to the database. Like that, the security is not a product, it is actually a process. And security is not concerned with one aspect of the system, but it is actually more concerned with every aspect of the system. For example, how the system is specified, how the system is designed, how it is implemented, what are all the different application software that is running on, and how these application software communicate with each other, what sort of protocols they use, what are the actual hardware that were used in an implementation, what are the configurations that are set on this hardware, how do these hardware operate, right? What are the versions of the firmware that is installed inside the hardware? All these are concerns of security. So, we can't pinpoint that security is a specific product which does all these things, but security is all pervasive inside the system. And interestingly, human factors also contribute a lot to the security. Who are the users, who are the administrators, and how are they aware, how do they behave from a security point of view? Are they strong, are they aware of the different security policies? All of this are concerns for security. First and foremost, let us go and understand what are we securing ourselves from. Now you see at least 6 case studies that we have put on the slide. The first one on the top was this mega upload problem, where there were a lot of free media, free movies, free software that were uploaded into one particular site, and people downloaded it because people liked watching movies. But what came as a quote unquote price was that along with this software, along with this media, along with these files came the malware and they were installed in the systems. So, this is completely anonymous, nobody actually knew, it was very indirect, and people actually, we can say they purchased at a free cost the malware. The second interesting thing was the Stuxnet, which was just because of improper security processes, wherein the whole software, the entire network was not exposed to the internet, but the whole software spread due to usage of USB drives. These need not be just commercial or technical, but this can also be political, like for example Georgia accuses Russia of waging cyber war. It can also be that it is not that it goes and security does not mean that something gets corrupted, but I also give a denial of service. For example, I want to access data, I am not allowed to access data, and that is what was done in the computer worm, which actually hit big businesses. The other thing was that I am not interested in corrupting data, but I am interested in what you are doing, sniffing, and this is what you see in that article, how Big Brother watches your every move. Then is of course the confidentiality or the privacy. You have a credit card, the details inside are private, and people are interested in stealing that private data. So, if you look at all these 6, there are different, these are all different facets. One is I do not even make data or the service available to you, it is a question of availability. Somewhere I make the data that is there not integral. For example, the mega upload, I am just looking for a movie, but what is there is movie plus some malware. And in the case of the internet, in the credit card, we have lost the confidentiality. So, the security is now against 3 parameters. If you can see here, it is against confidentiality of data or information, it is against integrity of the information, it is also against the availability of the information. So, what are we trying to secure ourselves from is a very important question. Now, so security essentially has different facets. So, we have some understanding of security in the last 2 slides. Now, we will go and talk about information. First and foremost, information is an asset. As per the Information Technology Act 2000, section 2F, this is the definition given for the information asset. An information asset includes all information resources utilized in the course of any organization's business. So, the information resources include the information itself plus the applications that process this information and the technology that on which these applications run, namely the hardware. So, if you look at there is a clear hierarchy, there is information, there are applications specifically developed or purchased to process this this information, and then these applications, the software, run on an existing hardware and software system, and they are connected to through networks. So, you can see information being processed by application software that is developed or purchased, which in turn runs on a compute system which has an hardware and operating system, and these compute systems are connected through networks. So, this is how from an information security point of view we can define an information asset. So, what is information? It is actually when data, raw data, when it is actually interpreted and it is used for making some business decisions, then essentially it becomes information. So, it is actually a form of knowledge that we acquire through education, communication, practical experience, research, analysis. So, this information actually consists of data, facts that you could interpret from the data, and conclusions that you could arrive at. For an engineer, it is any data that can be expressed as a binary string, but for a business analyst who performs some business analytics to make some basic decision, information is actually a form of knowledge. So, he sees the information as a data on which there are facts that are interpreted, and from those facts we could come to some conclusions. For the modern civilization, this information is the lifeblood. It is raw material from which understanding and ultimately controls are fashioned. There is a huge both research and practice in the industry involved in processing information that will basically go and make an organization make business decision, make money, bring out efficiency in that process. So, data, the information is something that is the lifeline for many of these organizations. Today the word intellectual property has come up very big. So, what is intellectual property? It is again collection of information that is known to a particular organization through which it makes a business, it makes a living. So, ideas like intellectual capital become very, very important in this point, and it basically dictates the economy of the country, the economy of an organization, economy of several organizations put together can even make the economy of the country. So, information is the lifeblood of the modern civilization. Now, this information, one of the important things that we note why information security becomes very important is that this information can be stored, it can be moved easily and actually very cheaply from place to place, and it could be replicated as many number of times I want. So, this is something very crucial about information. So, what can you do with this information? The information can be created, it can be modified, it can be stored, it can be destroyed, it can be processed, it can be used for proper and improper purposes, it can be transmitted, it can be corrupted, it can be lost, it can be stolen, and much more. It can be printed or written on paper, it can be stored electronically, it can be transmitted by post or using electronic means, it can be shown on corporate videos, it can be displayed or published on web, it can be spoken, verbal. So, these are all the things that you can do on this information. And suppose I want to maintain confidentiality of that information, I want to maintain some amount of integrity, and I want to make the information available, then I have to look at all these operations and ensure that each of these operations are adhere to some rules imposed by confidentiality, integrity and availability, and that makes the challenge for information security. Now, let us look at the value of information. The value of information comes from characteristics it possesses. So, what are the characteristics or attributes of an information? Why do you see, what is the, I say it is a very valuable information, what I mean by that term? First and foremost, we should look at these 7 important characteristics of information. Number 1 is availability. People who need this information, who are authorized to need this information, they should have access to this information whenever they want without any interference or obstruction, and they also need it in a correct format, and that is what we mean by availability of an information to an user. Please note that every word that is uttered in that defining of these characteristics is very, very important for you to appreciate information security. Let us go to the next term, namely accuracy. Accuracy means free from mistake or error and having the value that the end user expects. So, if the information contains a value different from what the end user expects, then it can be due to some intentional or unintentional modification of its content, and it is no longer accurate, right. So, the user has an expectation, it can be a scientific type of expectation. I need the answer accurate to last 4 digits. I need an answer that is accurate as far as say last night 10 p.m. right. So, it can be temporal, it can be in terms of the accuracy, in terms of mathematical accuracy, it can be accuracy in terms of by which time I should have taken the data, etc. The next point is the authenticity. The authenticity is the quality or state of the information being genuine. Is it original information or it is fabricated or reproduced from somewhere? How authentic is this information? What does it mean? So, what does authenticity essentially imply? It means that is the information originally created? Where was it placed? Where was it stored? And how was it transferred? All these things essentially imply authenticity. If I store at a very secure place, if I transfer through a secure network, then the information is authentic. If the place where the data, the hard disk or the data center where the data is stored is not secure as per certain norms, or the transportation or the transferring of the data is not through a secure network, then the data is not authentic. Confidentiality is defined as the quality or state of preventing disclosure or exposure to unauthorized individuals or systems. Integrity is the quality or state of being whole, complete and uncorrupted. So, what could happen to a data? It can be corrupted, that means it can be damaged, it can be destructed or other disruption of its authenticity. If the data loses authenticity, if the data is corrupted or it is damaged or destructed, then it is no more having the property of integrity. Then the utility of the data, it should be used for some purpose, some meaningful purpose to the end user, and it should be available in a format that is meaningful to the end user, and that is what we term utility of the data. Possession of the data, I get access to the data, I have ownership to the data, that means I possess data. Please note that if an unauthorized user possesses data, that means there is a breach of confidentiality. So, if there is a breach of confidentiality, then there is a breach of possession. That means somebody who should not have the data has the data. On the other hand, somebody has a possession of data, it does not imply that there is a possession, if somebody has a breach of possession, it does not mean there is a breach of confidentiality. In some sense, if somebody who should not have the data has the data, but it is in an encrypted form, then the end user, the user who has this data cannot do anything with this data. So, a breach of confidentiality implies a breach of possession, but a breach of possession does not imply a breach of confidentiality. Why I made this last statement is to tell that all these 7 are highly coupled with each other. The heightening of one can lower the other, or the heightening of one can enhance the other. So, all these 7 characteristics are very tightly coupled, and understanding this coupling is also very important for us to appreciate information security.